Hey there, welcome to Synth Seeker. My name is Luke. We're at it again. It's another talking head video, spectroscope video. I want to talk a bit about synth community stuff and gas and things like that. A couple of weeks ago, I published a manifesto, the Manifesto for Critical Thinking in Synthesizer Culture. Um, and uh, and I'm not trying to make waves. I'm just working through in my head how to have more joy in my creative process, and as far as synthesizers and the community around it, and my peers, and my own projects, things like that are concerned. And to that end, I have been working on some music. I'm put out an album just recently. I'm feeling mighty fine. And today is 2 days before Christmas. It's December 23rd. It's Christmas Eve. Got a few chores to do today, but I wanted to just quickly throw a little audio video out on something that I've been sort of thinking about, and that's synthesizers, the engagement therein, and the myth of gas. I really want to try and use this little essay here to put the nail in the coffin on the idea of gas because, just surfing through the community and talking to my peers and listening to people lament, uh, it's just, the synth community is a little weird around synthesizers. Well, anyway, let me just talk about it. I've got this essay. I'm not going to read you the essay. You can go and read it if you want. I am just going to paraphrase it here. I'm going to skim it and sort of give you the high level gist of what I'm trying to say here. And if it's interest to you, you can go take a read if you want. And Anyway, it's over at there's a website, onevoltperoctave.com. When you get there, there's like three things listed there. There's the Manifesto for Critical Thinking in Synth Culture, which you can, read if you're interested in, if you're a manifesto kind of person. And then there's this essay, Synthesizers Engagement and the Myth of Gas. That's what I want to talk about today. Uh, so essentially, I'm just gonna let's just dive in. I'm gonna give you the high level, snarky Bob Ross version. Okay. So this question keeps popping up mentally in my head. It's like, why does synth culture keep arguing with itself? Right? And so like uh the synth culture, is awesome, right? It's vibrant, it's creative, it's opinionated, and it's kind of repetitive. Arguments come and go, but they keep reoccurring, more coming. Yeah, just analog versus digital, hardware versus software, but also things like minimalism versus excess. Like, you need a minimal synth rig, or or that's an excessive synth rig. What are you doing? And then discipline versus indulgence, right? People are talking about gas. They blame the gas for this stuff, gear acquisition syndrome, right? The desire to keep buying more synths, right? And it's my silly tagline is buy more synths. I've been saying that for years, right? And that triggers some people, and some people think it's funny and whatever. Um, but gas is blamed for a lot of regret, a lot of overspending and distraction and creative paralysis. It's like I can't get anything done because I'm gassing so hard for all the new stuff that comes out. People will say, I have heard it said. Um, and we talk about gas like it's a disease, right? And I did a video on this a year or two ago, right? And I've been thinking about it more, and I've developed the idea in my head a little bit more clearly, and I think I'm in a good place. And so I just want to share it here, right? You treat it like a disease, a force that grabs us, and that it's something external that hijacks our otherwise rational, synthesizer brain. I just don't think this is useful anymore, right? Because I went through the cycle just like everyone else, right? Buying, selling, regretting, rebuying. I think I bought the OP1 original 3 times. Bought it, tried it, sold it, bought it again, tried it, sold it, bought it again, sold it again. Still don't have one. I've went through 3 of them. Teenage engineering, you win as far as marketing is concerned. Um, but finally, my collection has stabilized in the last couple of years, and it's a collection that consistently brings me joy. I really am super happy with it, and so I read and listen to my peers lament of their frustrations, and it's like I just wanted to write this down to see if it might help other people, right? So I'm going to just share this stuff. Um, the problem is not it's not gas, right? It's not how many synthesizers someone owns. That's not a problem, right? I don't own enough synthesizers, you could say. But some people are like, I only own one, right? And other people are like, I have too many. It's consumed my home. That's pretty irrelevant, right? It's the problem is that we lack a clear sort of way to understand what synthesizers do and how they shape our behavior and why we are drawn to them in the first place. Like, why are we so synth obsessed? Like, what is it about our culture, right? So I wrote this essay, right? And I'm using that as sort of notes here as I ramble on. And again, you can go read it. Go to onevoltperoctave.com and read it if you're a reading kind of person. Okay, if not, if you're a video watching kind of person, stick around. All right. But we need some kind of framework that helps us understand this stuff. We need something that combines both the technical side of synths, because synths are very technical, but there's also like a philosophical side. And you need to think about both. So sort of the point of this video isn't to tell you what to buy, and it isn't to do anything like that. It's there to help myself, really. I did this to work it out in my own head and to see maybe I'm sharing it because it might be useful for others, right? But help synthesizer enthusiasts evaluate an instrument in terms of not like feature lists and hype, but evaluate synthesizers in terms of engagement and what their intent is and how much joy they can get out of it, right? It's not about hype or guilt or community dogma. Okay. So let's start here. This is a old chestnut. People throw this around all the time. It's not just synth community. It's in like any creative space. You will hear this, and you'll have to imagine my finger quotes here. Limitations set you free, right? People say that all the time. Now, it's not a bad statement, right? Applied carefully, it's pretty good. It has a certain amount of merit, but applied like as a tired old chestnut, you throw it around, it really becomes like this sort of moral hammer that people shame other people with, right? You've got too much stuff. You need some limitations. You got too many VSTs in there, kid. You're obviously paralyzed and can't produce anything good, right? What's usually meant when people say that phrase, they don't actually mean limitation. They mean constraint, right? A limitation is something that's imposed on you from outside, right? It's a deprivation. A limitation is you're not allowed to have this thing anymore. You have to do the task without these things. You're deprived. And that's not cool, right? You don't want to use limitations. Limitations don't actually set you free. Constraints, on the other hand, these are chosen deliberately in service of a goal for your project. Constraint is not the same thing as a limitation, right? You want constraints. You don't want limitations. Um, when you go and you like sell your instruments or you refuse to buy new ones, right? Or or you have a desire to buy new stuff. Oh, look at that new synth. I really want that. That new domino looks pretty cool, right? And you shame yourself or you get shamed. And it's implied that you have no creative discipline. Like, I just want to get more synths. That's the wrong way to frame it. Like in reality, um, that sort of idea is a holdover from this weird old romantic notion that art, in order to do true art, you got to suffer for it, right? That's baloney. Okay. If it works for you, fine, right? But it's not my bag. All right. Uh, creativity thrives on inspiration and flow, right? For many people, new tools are inspiring, right? So when you get a new synth, you're inspired by it, right? And new approaches using old tools are also inspiring, right? You get a firmware update for your synth and it adds like a couple new features or, fixes some bugs and you're like, ooh, I am inspired again to use this baby, right? So the sort of takeaway I want you to have here is that you don't constrain your tools. Constraints aren't about the stuff you use. Constraints are about your approach on your project. All right. So constraints belong to projects, not to people, not to identities. A constraint would be this piece, the project, will only use these three synths, or this track I'm working on will only use one oscillator per voice. That's a constraint. Or this month, I'm going to explore this one instrument very deeply, right? Those are constraints. Those are good. Those apply to your project. This is not you. You're not saying, I need to do this to myself because I need more discipline. That's, again, baloney. You don't need to go there. Constraints are for projects, not people. All right. And so those three things I threw there, piece only uses three synths, track's only going to use one OSP per voice, or this month I'm going to go hit the op6 and learn how, filter operators work, right? Those are healthy, empowering constraints. They may add to your inspiration, and they don't require abstinence or shame or any sort of like behavior where you're like a monk out in the woods living, an aesthetic life, right? So it's constraints, not limitations. Okay. Let's be clear on that. Now, let's talk about synths, right? Synthesizers. What are synthesizers? What do they mean to us? Synthesizers, in a very grand way, I'm going to get a little woo woo here. Synthesizers are systems of possibility. All right. To think about a synthesizer clearly, we kind of need to simplify them a little bit. I have been having success simplifying them, and not in like marketing terms, because marketing is, got fangs, and the marketers are trying to do their job, which is to get you to want something, right? So we need to simplify synths, or at least abstract them so we don't talk about them in sort of marketing terms. We want to talk about them in terms of functional behaviors, functional categories. So when I'm shopping or comparing or reflecting or reviewing a new synth or an old synth that's been brought to my attention, I reduce every synthesizer into a small set of six conceptual buckets, right? And I did a video about this a year ago. I've expanded on this, and I just want to cover it here again. Um, this is not a scientific model about synthesis. This isn't breaking down types of synthesis or things like that. This is a decision-making model. All right. And so the model has these six parts. It is the functional capability of the synth model. Okay. Synths have these six sort of buckets. They've got inputs, they've got players, they've got wave sources, they've got shapers and modulators and outputs. Okay. Let's talk about each of these things, right? I'll throw some diagrams up on the screen to sort of illustrate as we go. All right. So synthesizers have inputs. An input is, how does information get into the synth? It's by its keys, its keybed, or through MIDI, or through CV and gate. Touch surfaces, some kind of controller, right? These are inputs, right? This is very simple, boring stuff, right? They also have players, right? Players are things in the system that generate or transform the inputs, right? So sequencers, arpeggiators, generative tools, they take the things you play and they turn it into more things or more complex things or more interesting things. Those are players. Synths might have a player, it might have a sequencer, or it might have an arpeggiator, it might have both. Synthesizers also have the third bucket. Well, I'm just calling them wave sources. So this is, where does the sound come from? And I don't care what your synthesis method is. Like, different synths have different synth methods. At the end of the day, they all make air vibrate, right? So oscillators, samples, noise, external inputs that get processed, all the different kinds of synthesis, mechanisms, these are wave sources. Okay. So synths have inputs, they've got players, they've got wave sources. They've also got, that's halfway, they've also got shapers, right? Shapers are the parts of a synthesizer that transform the sound in some way. So mixers are a very basic form of shaper. It's a mixer. It can make things louder or softer. It can take two sounds and mix them together at various levels. Filters are shapers, distortion, wave folding, all the effects, reverb, delay, chorus, modulation effects, any of that. Those are all shapers, and synthesizers have or don't have shapers, right? Minimoog, no effects. Stoation Summit, lots of effects, right? These are shapers, right? So we've got inputs, players, wave sources, shapers, and we also have modulators. So modulators are the things that bring the sound to life over time, right? Envelopes, LFOs, all those modulation sources and targets, right? These are the invisible hands that work within a synthesizer to tweak parameters and play with things that bring the sound to life. And these are measurable. You can say, I can count how many modulation sources and targets, the targets and destinations that the synth has, right? How many envelopes, how many LFOs. These are modulators. And they can target the parts of the synth. They can also target themselves. You can modulate your modulators, right? So that's our fifth bucket. And then our sixth and final bucket of the functional capability model for synthesizers is outputs. How does sound leave the instrument? You've got outs. It's like this synth is, it only runs in mono. It's got one out. And this synth runs in stereo. It has two outs. And this synth is multi-timbral. It has multiple outs, and you could route things. You can control the routing, and they do or they don't have headphone outs. I hope they do. And other integration options like this synth actually sends audio over USB. It acts like an audio interface, right? These are the outputs. So we've got these six buckets that make up the functional capability of a synth: inputs, players, wave sources, shapers, modulators, and outputs. All right. And you can look at any synth and sort of assign the parts of that synth into these buckets. And this allows you to compare and contrast between synthesizers that are wildly different. And we'll get to why this you need to abstract this, because they can be so different, right? A Lyra 8, organismic synthesizer, is a very different critter from a Phantom, right? From Roland. Very different. So people say, like, how do you compare these? Well, some would argue you don't, but this is a framework that will allow you to, at least if you're going to make a purchase, you're going to need to be able to compare them and understand, like, what do these do? What do they do for me? And how can I use them? And that's what this sort of little micro model is for: the functional capabilities of a synth. All right. So, but that's not the only way to think about synths from a value perspective. Okay. So that's one axis. The other axis is engagement, the engagement oriented synth evaluation, right? So I'm going to throw a diagram up on the screen. Okay. Um, so there is, the way you engage with a synth is just as important as the capabilities of that synth. And you have to think about both of them when you are evaluating what synth you're going to buy, right? Or what you're going to use for a project, or what constraints you're going to apply to something. All right. The value of a synth doesn't live on just this capability axis. It also has this creative engagement spectrum. Like, how are you going to engage with it? Some things are very performance oriented, but some things are very performance oriented from a muscular place, right? You play it, a performative place. Others are very performance oriented, but from a technical, abstract place. Like, well, so let's throw some examples. So let's take this. Here's our axes. All right, our axes, whatever the plural is. Um, the vertical one is your functional capability. When you're at the bottom of that, it's like low, right? It doesn't have a lot of shapers. It doesn't have a lot of oscillators. It doesn't have a lot of voices. Things at the top, they have lots of features, many, many filters, many, many envelopes, many, many LFOs, lots of oscillators, right? So that's the functional capability axis, okay? And then the horizontal axis is your creative engagement spectrum. It's, how do I engage with this thing? And there isn't a less or more sort of sort of component to the horizontal axis. It's just different zones you're in, right? So if over on the far left can be I like to, classic, Rick Wakeman style, Jordan Rudess, I like to play my instrument, right? And that's one zone over there. And maybe in the middle is sort of like the craft work. We are music engineers, and we use them as scientific tools, and we still perform just as validly, but it's a different kind of performance. Or maybe on the far right, you've got your sort of modular place where it's like we are system builders, right? And we build a system that plays itself, right? So there's this creative engagement spectrum that a synth will fall into. Okay. The same synth can fall into different places for different people. We'll get to that in a bit. But let's take this axis and let's throw some examples up. Let's take a mini Moog style synth, right? And I'm not I'm not going with Moog or Behringer or whatever. It's like the Model D archetype. All right. So let's analyze it using our capability, right? Our capability sort of framework, our model. A Model D style synth has very few wave sources, right? It's got three oscillators, but they have very limited number of shapes they can do. They don't have any like wave folding or ways to sort of manipulate that shape very much other than mixing. It has a few shapers. It's got a filter, right? It has a pretty limited set of modulation capabilities, right? So its functional capability is actually quite low, right? But I'm going to put it over here in this quadrant. This is it has a very high immediacy, right? But and a low cognitive load. You don't have to hold a lot of stuff about a Model D style synth in your head to use it effectively, right? It just doesn't have that much stuff going on there, but it sounds great. It's very performative, but it can be quite engaging, right? When you engage with it, it could be focused on your performance, your muscle memory. You know, you're a player, right? Your mom forced you to take all those piano lessons back in the day, right? She wanted you to be a concert pianist, and you went off and said, "I'm going to be a rock star." That's fine. And so there is just the inherent use of a Model D is going to be placing some constraints on you, right? Constraints for the project that you choose to use that synth with. So we'll stick it over here. Boink. Okay. Let's take another example. Let's talk about the Electron Digitact. Okay. Now, the Digitact compared to the Model D has a higher sort of functional capability, right? It's got more features, right? A moderate functional scope, and it has strong players, right? It's sequencer. It's got a sequencer, and it's a very powerful sequencer, right? And so when you are engaged with it, it's not in the same vertical column as a Model D. It's off to the side a little bit. It has its own sort of lane it runs in. Engagement for a Digitact leans towards the constraint of sort of loop-based composition. You're working with loops and variations, and you're iterating on those over time when you're performing, perhaps, or when you're writing your music. Right. So that falls in a different space, a little higher up the functional capability axis, but it's over in its own lane. All right, it's a different kind of creative engagement. If we look at a third example, let's talk about Waldorf Iridium, right? So the Iridium is, again, higher on the functional capability scale. I'm going to slap it over here. It has multiple complex wave sources. It's got a ton of shapers. It has really deep modulation capabilities, right? It actually has a very high expressive capability, right? You could be extremely expressive with an iridium, but it has a very high cognitive load. You have to know how to use and reach in and connect all of that expressivity, right? And so engagement may be through, in this case, I'll put it in its own lane where, like when I engage with the iridium, I want to be exploring. I want to be doing sound design, or I want to be working on the long-term study. I've owned the thing for years and I'm still working through the manual. But again, so higher capability, but again, in its own lane. All right. And then a fourth example would be a modular, right? Modular synths have extremely high functional scope, right? Because it's got a user-defined signal flow. It's effectively got an infinite sort of capability because you're only limited by space, time, and money, right? You can build as big a system as you want. The engagement for a modular depends entirely on the synth enthusiast's tolerance for complexity. Like, can you deal with the complexity of a modular synth? And what's your desire to design systems rather than play instruments, right? I go to a mini moog style synth when I want to play. I want to be that Jordan Rudess, Rick Winkman kind of guy, right? I go to a modular. The joy in modular for me is in building a system, right? Like you go get on, well, Jesus, what is the modulargrid.net, and start building out stuff, like imagining how is the system going to work? How's it going to connect together? What things can I put in? What Lego bricks can I add into the system, right? So it's a different, again, it's a different engagement model for me and for many people, right? It's not a engagement models aren't good or bad. They're not one isn't better than another one. They're different. That's why they're in different sort of vertical lanes on the graph, right? Functional capability is a measurable sort of metric. Like there could be low functional capability that has pros and cons, and there could be high functional capability that has pros and cons. But the creative engagement is its own beast. It's a different axis. And when you're evaluating a synthesizer, you need to consider both for you, right? And then, just as a fifth example for completeness, let's talk about software synthesizers, right? Uh, Soft synths offer potential, right? Immense potential for everything, modulation depth, easy experimentation, high performance value potentially. The engagement with a software synth hinges on the workflow preference, not the sort of capability legitimacy, right? The functional capability of a soft synth varies widely, and you can get them for free. You could pay a ton of money for them, and people can decide whether that works in their particular engagement model, right? And I'm not even going to try and put specific soft synths on this map. We'll just hit it with a shotgun pattern and say, bam, there's some soft synths. They're everywhere, right? Uh, and so that is the sort of second thing when you consider a synthesizer, you think about its functional capabilities, but you also think about its engagement model. You think about both of those, and then you determine what's important to you, right? And what ultimately is the most important thing is engagement. Okay. Engagement matters more than ownership, right? So we can all go buy the same synths, right? So if you've got two people and they buy the same synthesizer model, right? You buy a Korg multipoly and I buy a Korg multipoly, right? But we have completely different outcomes. Or what's the one that's popular? Oh, this one came up in my local community, right? The Micro Monster 2, right? I know two synth people who have both bought that synth, and one of them totally engaged with it and the other one couldn't get into it, right? One feels energized and productive, made videos about it, and the other feels kind of guilty and distracted or maybe disappointed, right? And the difference is not the instrument, right? It's the same instrument for both of these two people. And so that sort of cancels out. And the difference is the relationship they have with the synth. That's their engagement. Engagement matters more than capability and ownership, right? When we have regrets about a synth we buy, it tends to be because of, there was a bunch of overlap with something that we hadn't yet internalized or learned, right? It's like, oh, I didn't realize I've got a synth that does that already. Or the complexity of the synth exceeds our, cognitive capacity, right? It's like, wow, this is like the Iridium is a scientist's synthesizer, and I'm not, I'm new to the game and I'm not ready for that level of depth, right? I want something a little simpler. Maybe I prefer that mini Moog archetype, right? Or again, this is where gas comes in. People are like saying, "Oh, I bought this because the gas made me do it." If you are externalizing your desire for synths, right? That's we talked about that earlier. That's not a good model to follow. Own your desire, right? Gas is a myth. And then we get into this place where the purchasing itself is a substitute or an impediment to engagement, right? We buy a synth, and then before we fully engage with it, we buy another synth, and then we buy another synth, right? And that is a failure model that you can get into, a failure pattern. Um, but for this reason, this is why I really no longer find gas a useful concept. Gas anthropomorphizes desire and shifts the responsibility away from the individual, right? Um, Wanting a synthesizer is not a disease, okay? Overspending and neglect as a result of buying a synthesizer, those again are not a disease. That's a behavioral problem, okay? It's not the object's fault. You can't blame it externally. So gas is just drop it. It's over, right? Own the desire. Say, I want this thing, and here's why. These are the functional capabilities it provides, and this is how I plan on engaging with it. And I'm going to use these constraints to move my project forward, and it's going to be joyous. I'm going to love it, right? It is way healthier to do that than pretending that desire is some invading force that comes in and takes control of your wallet. Yeah. So when you go shopping, because that's the ultimate goal, right? We want to be inspired and get new tools and things like that. When you go shopping, you could use a checklist for intentional synth evaluation, right? And there's a few categories. So when you go in, you go, okay, well, what's my musical intent? What kind of music do I want to explore right now? Right? You don't need to go fixate on spec sheets and marketing stuff, right? That stuff gets your attention, but then you got to let go and start thinking about it, right? And say, okay, musical intent. What kind of music do I want to explore with this synth with right now, right? Does this synth align with that exploration, right? So that's intent. And then you want to say, check the functional fit, right? And this is a spec sheet thing. How does this synth differ from the ones I already own? And where does it sit in terms of that model? How many shapers, inputs, modulation sources, those six categories, right? Players, does it have an ARP? Does it have a sequencer? How does that fit into what I want, right? So that's you using an actual metric to evaluate a synth. And then you also look at that engagement style stuff. Will this inspire a flow for me? What kind of usage category am I putting it in? Am I using it from a very performative muscle memory place? Am I using it as part of a system building thing? It's going to play itself somewhere in between, right? Do I want depth and immediacy and performance focus, or do I want to get in and do exploration and science, and I want to get inside those menus and understand what those deep things are and how they work and how they relate to each other, right? So that's an engagement style. So we check our intent, we check our functional fit, we check our engagement style. Then we look at a few things that are important. We look at constraint potential, right? What constraints could I choose when using the synth? And does it invite focused exploration, or does it invite endless tweaking, right? Those are different but equally valid, right? And then the last couple adulting things, be aware of your own biases, right? Am I responding to hype? Is this, am I buying this because I watched a video and it's very nostalgic and I remember it from my childhood loving Roland D50, and that's why I want to buy this thing that's like based on the D50. That's nostalgia. Just be aware of it. It doesn't say you have to deny it. It's not saying it's bad. Just be, cognizant of what your motivations are. Um, would I want this synth if it wasn't labeled with the name of whoever makes it, right? You know. And then also, last bit of adulting, do the responsibility check. Can I afford it without stress or resentment, right? Do I, all the jokes and memes in the community about hiding things from your spouse or your significant other, right? Um, you know, we laugh about it, but, adulting is adulting, right? Do you have, do you have the funds to be able to afford it? And even if you don't, there are tons of free synths. Go in the software route, right? So it's not that this isn't a limitation, and it's certainly not a constraint. You just say, this is a responsibility check for, can I get this thing? Will it fit into my flow? And do I have the time and desire to engage with it? All right. So if you answer all these questions, right? So intent, functional fit, engagement style, constraints, potentially. Um, am I being biased? Am I dragged in, for bias reasons? And then am I being responsible about my acquisition? If you can, provide answers there that feel grounded and honest, then you don't even have to worry about gas. Desire is not, you don't have to justify wanting the thing. It's like, it's very clear. Own it. Uh, so wrapping up, this is sort of it. Like, I don't want to talk about this again. And people ask in every stream I do, someone says, "Hey, would you pick synth A or synth B?" Right? Or what are your thoughts on synth A? That the what are your thoughts on is, less of a trigger for me. It's like, sure, we could talk about the functional capabilities and we could talk about how I engage with it. I'll share that with you. That's fun. I like talking about that stuff. Right? But like, synth A versus synth B, um, I don't want to compare them from outside of this framework, right? So that's why I'm publishing this thing. I'm like saying, okay, if we want to have these discussions, let's discuss them within the sort of boundaries of this, little essay I've written. I will be happy to talk with you guys about functional capabilities in the sort of abstract sense, and I'll be happy to talk with you guys about the engagement model that we're going to do. That's like, those are discussions that are just pure joy, because it's like, how do you do it? Oh, that's cool. This is how I do it, um, that's where we want to go. If you find yourself, in that gas place where there's resentment or regret or apprehension or, you know, whatever, these things that are not joy, you try and let go of that and try and flip over to this sort of model. See if that helps you. Um, and I hope it leads to like maybe a happier synth culture. Synth culture does not need more rules. I'm not saying these are new rules you have to abide by. it just needs to have better questions it asks, right? Instead of saying, is this synth worth it? Right? Or it's like, is this a good synth or is it just the marketing hype getting to me? Right? Um, you know, you can ask, how will I engage with this? Like, what kind of engagement model does this synth really invite into itself? Right? That's cool. Like all the Soma Labs synths, the Lyra, all of those really bizarre, very, you know, Russian Sputnik-y kind of synths, right? They have a very fascinating engagement model that they're shooting for, right? Their intent is very clear. I want to have those discussions with you guys, right? Or discussions of constraints. And then we're talking about our projects, right? What kind of, oh, I've got this new project I'm working on, and these are the constraints I'm doing. I've applied to the project, right? These are not I don't want to talk about your discipline. Like I need to be more disciplined and, have more limitations around my synth usage. It's like, no, 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 that's the wrong perspective. I want to have conversations with you. Does this tool bring me closer to the kind of music making I enjoy, right? You could talk about genres. People roll their eyes when you say genre, but it's like certain tools, certain synthesizers lend to an engagement that leads towards a particular genre, or right that genre evolved because of the engagement model that's prevalent in that area, right? So things to think about. I want to have those conversations with you guys. All right. So that's the point of this video. So synthesizers are not moral tests. They're just instruments. They're extensions of curiosity. Synthesizers are curiosity, play, and expression. Joy. That's what they're for. When I walk into my studio now, I have no regret. I don't see regret. Nothing gets triggered. I see an orchestra. Each instrument has a role, a personality, and a reason for being there. And I am the conductor, and the responsibility and joy of it is mine, all mine, right? And that to me is a healthier philosophy for synthesizer enthusiasts, right? So take it, you know, take it or leave it. That's where we're at. So once again, it's published in extreme detail over at 1voltperoctave.com, as well as the manifesto for critical thinking in synthesizer community. The manifesto is more about how we deal with each other and our synthesizers. And this essay is really about how we put value on synthesizers and how to get rid of gas, because gas is a myth. All right. So it's over there. If you like this framework, if it makes sense to you, it's also over there as a PDF. Again, I'm not selling any of this. It's all Creative Commons. It's all open. You can share it, recycle it, build on it, sell it. Like it's do whatever you want with it. If it provides value to you, that's great. And really, that's about it. So, hey, thanks for spending time with me here at Synth Seeker. You have a freaking awesome new year coming up. All right. Talk to you later.